Good morning, everyone. So today is the third part of talking about the Zen ox herding pictures, which are generally considered to reflect the stages on the path of enlightenment, so our Zen path. And these are transformative. It's a series of really transformative pictures that reflect our own paths of discovery of our own hearts and our minds. So in these stages, remember that although they are presented in a row or in a linear fashion, and I'm certainly talking about them in a linear fashion, in fact, just as we are on our own path, we recognize ourselves along here, but we might loop back to another stage and forward to another stage, or be in two stages at the same time. It's just like our practice. So we can use them as study guides. We can contemplate them, or read the accompanying poems and use that as a way to further our practice. We might have a teacher who brings our attention to them, mostly as a way to discuss where we are or have been in our own practice. However we use them, they are rich. They're historical depictions of the path we are on now. They're alive, and we can learn from them. We can meditate on them, or merely just look at the images and notice what happens in our own minds and our own bodies. So let's take a quick look at the ones we've already looked at together over the last 2 weeks. So Kate, if you can please show drawings number 1, 2, and 3 of the 10. And again, these are from John Daitalori's book, Riding the Ox Home, these first 3. And they represent, of course, from the top to the left, to the bottom left, the search for the ox and finding traces of the ox. And lastly, at the bottom right, seeing the ox. And the ox, as we know, represents enlightenment. And the ox herder is anyone who is walking this Zen path. And just as a reminder, these 3 are different from the 3. We do not have these 3 in the Zendo. We start with number 4, and Kate, if you would show us the next 2, number 4 and 5. And these are the first 2 in our set of 6 pictures that we have hanging here in the Zendo. These drawings that were commissioned by my root teacher, Myo-an Grace Shearson. And you notice in our pictures, the bull has some white on it. First a bit, and then a lot. And the white of the bull represents our emerging insight, our emerging awakening. So the picture on the left is catching the ox, and then taming the ox. So these express, moments we might recognize and feel. These moments of searching for answers, searching for a path, and then finding traces of it, and then seeing it or glimpsing parts of it briefly. So in other words, small amounts of awakening to our true selves. And then we're catching the ox, but we can still feel the tenacity of the ego, our ego really. And then 5th, this last picture, everything is settled a bit. We can walk side by side with the ox more freely. But notice, we're still using a tether. And so our path continues. So Kate, please show us the next picture. And this is the poem, Tachibana's poem that I spoke of last week, that accompanies this picture. The body is half white. When will it be white through and through? Though you have ascended to the lofty temple, you have not yet entered the room. The body is half white. When will it be white through and through? Though you have ascended to the lofty temple, you have not yet entered the room. So we might find in this stage of our path that we have a sense of ease now, maybe an awareness of the unity of our life and our practice, our life and the phenomenon that we're getting to know, a sense of non-separation, interdependency of all things. And teachers may point to this time of our practice of being one of really no return, and maybe you feel this. Once we have had experiences clearly seeing our own egos and the impermanent nature of ourself, it's difficult to walk away. It's difficult to ignore it now. So we're trusting in ourselves. We're trusting in our practice in ways that maybe we didn't before. But at least in the way it offers this honest, self-supporting opportunity to be more real, to be more authentic. John Dido-Lurie shares this ancient commentary about this stage. He says that the struggle is over. Gain and loss are assimilated. I sing the song of the village woodsman and play the tunes of the children. Astride the ox, I observe the clouds above, and onward I go, no matter who may wish to call me back. Thank you, Kate. So we may have noticed this in ourselves by way of others reacting to us, for instance, or wondering, gosh, how can you stay so committed? Why is this so important to you? How can you actually drive up to Oakhurst every Sunday? You know, how can you sit in a cushion for even a half an hour, much less going to a sesshin and sitting on a cushion all day and into the night? You know, for me and obviously for many of you, this is quite simply what our heart leads us to do. There's no question for me in my mind or my heart about staying on this path, and I think we likely don't question ourselves about it now. We might, but we have a commitment. And this is what we're committed to, and we're committed to it endlessly. You know, I remember my root teacher, Grace again, telling me at times when I was talking to her in Dokusan, to just trust the practice. But you know, as a beginner, I was meeting this idea mostly with my mind, I think, not my heart. And over time, however, you know, I noticed that, you know, my commitment was in my body too. It was in my heart and it was in my mind. And over time, I learned I could trust what I was experiencing on the cushion. So you remember that the Buddha urged his followers to not believe him, to not just listen to his teachings or read about his teachings. He said, you have to try it out. You have to experience it, and then you can make a decision about it. So maybe this is that time for us. You know, we've been experiencing it, and we've learned to trust it. I can trust my body if I let myself feel it and listen to it. I could trust my heart if I identified this small ego and didn't let it get in the way. And I could trust my mind. Mostly I could trust it to be mind. But now, I learned to trust that too. There's mind being mind. And I now had tools to become more aware of it. and how it was acting. So I had more trust in myself to show up, to be in the present moment, and to not turn away. And I think many of you have that same experience. And maybe it's at this stage that we can more readily identify it. We can see it. We can feel it more clearly. So we're well on the path, really. But Laurie says for complete maturation, you must experience what we call the great death, a complete obliteration of any remaining notions of a self-entity that is separate and distinct from others. In fact, Zen training is really about not holding on to anything. You know, not the forms, the words, the rituals, the insights. Because as we learn, that there really is nothing to hold on to. You know, you chant this every Sunday. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Just have this lack of inherent existence of all things is also the reality that we are experiencing. And from this place, we can easily see how we move into stage 7. So Kate, would you put up the next picture, please? So spend a moment with this one. I have such a great urge just to have you all speak up right now, so I hope you will do that later. So here's the accompanying poem for this. Astride the ox, you reach home. Now at rest, the ox is forgotten. With the bright sun high in the sky, you're in a blissful repose. The whip and tether are abandoned. So this stage is referred to, and we'll leave it up there for a minute, okay? This stage is referred to as forgetting the ox, or more simply, reaching home. The ox is gone. No more struggle with the ox, maybe. And we may feel that our practice is effortless at this point. We may feel that we have opened wide to life once we find the ego can, in fact, get out of the way. That we can forget about the self. And so compassion manifests. Compassion towards ourselves and others. Thank you, Kate. For me, having spent so much of my life hiding from myself, and consequently, of course, hiding from others, pursuing wholeheartedly a spiritual practice that emphasizes and really demands of us that we study ourselves was and is a relief. And it demands that we study ourselves unrelentingly, not turning away. This is work. It's work. And it's during this stage that we're experiencing that kind of unrelenting study. And as we say in Zen, you know, nothing is fixed, nothing is lacking, nothing is extra. There's no clinging as we begin to trust ourselves, our lives, and our practice. So as we become able to let go, to not cling, it's pointed out that there can be some danger in this. And maybe you've known some people who reach this place in practice and who decide, I have what I need. I don't need this anymore. They don't need the forms, the tradition, the chants, the sangha, the perceived rigidity maybe. And they'll just go it alone, thank you. And they might have felt that they understood what they needed in order to go off and maybe disconnect from the structure of the practice, or even maybe you've known some people who just sort of leave the messiness of the world and go off to practice alone. However, it's important, the point is made during this, and when talking about this particular stage, it's important not to give up on the practice part. After all, it's the practice, the forms, the tradition, the support of the Sangha, the support of the teachings that has brought us to this point. It's the practice that has healed us and nurtured us. And importantly, these all heal others as well. Our practice and use of the forms and the chants and whatever the tradition has brought to your practice. What we do here on Sundays, for instance, or what we do when we offer and show up twice daily for Zazen Zoom meditation sits. We do all of this also in support of others. And it's really important. So in this, the seventh picture, the ox herd is home and has realized the ox was never separate from her, but rather simply the means of realizing oneness. So now the ox can be forgotten. Because actually, the ox is none other than the experience of our everyday lives and of everything in our lives. So this can be interpreted to mean that the separation of practice and realization that we spoke of last week has been overcome, as has the separation of ordinary reality and ultimate reality. So maybe the relative and the absolute. Until now, the ox herd has been practicing meditation as a means of achieving enlightenment. But with realization of the non-duality of existence comes this awareness of the practice itself is realization. And Dogen said importantly, and I quote, I won't quote, I might have misquoted, but I have the idea. We don't practice to attain enlightenment. We practice because practice is enlightenment. So at this stage, in his book, Daido Lore said, wisdom and compassion begin to mutually arise, and compassion begins to function freely in our lives. And I just really love that. Compassion begins to function freely. And I'm wondering if you feel this too. I'm wondering how you might express it. These words are powerful to me, I think because I've experienced the feeling of it. Excuse me. Excuse me. A spontaneous, I got some here. A spontaneous arising of compassion. This natural tendency that we all have. We may not always access it, but it is always accessible. And at this point in the journey, compassion quite simply starts to permeate and inhabit life. Our life, and the life of others. It has already begun to soften and open our hearts and our minds, at times and in situations, and within our experiences, without the slightest need of anything from us. Of course, there are times when we need to bring awareness to a compassionate response, rather than one that we feel like doing that might harm ourselves or others. But we're beginning to see and feel how our non-separation, our interdependence, and our wisdom related to it manifests as open heart, manifests as empathy and compassion and caring for all things. So we will finish up our discussion of the ox herding pictures next Sunday. But in the meantime, maybe we can ponder our own journey toward wisdom, and we may recognize our own compassionate responses. But most importantly, I think, is let's just be wisdom. Let's just be compassion.